Okay, welcome back. This is GCSE poetry, seen and unseen poetry for my Langdon Park school students. This is Dr. Jane. This is video 4 on Tennyson. We're going to look at Tennyson. And what we're going to look at is exploring the way context can help us understand poetry. As per usual, we're going to be starting by thinking about big ideas, and then we're going to practice our skills of reading any poem at any time. That means to actually read the poem, to reread the poem, to start to think about what the meaning is, and then to start thinking about how the meaning is made. And we're going to look at context, which is a little bit about Victorian poetry, because for those of you in year 10 who've read Jekyll and Hyde, you've read a Victorian novel. Now I want to look at Victorian poetry and how it does similar or different things, if we can find some ways of finding some links there. So let's begin by looking at this image. In this image to the left are two of the symbols of Britain. What are they and what do they represent? So if you know who those people are or what they represent, great. If not, what I'd like you to do is pause this video and search on the internet what are these symbols of Britain and what are they trying to get at? And you can look at the shield, the trident, who that woman is, who that animal is to the left of her, and find out. Okay, you've done that. You've looked at these symbols now. You have an idea of what they are and what they represent. Now I want you to think about this. This is an opinion line. There are two. If you're there with someone who you can talk to, that's fantastic. If you're not, what I'd like you to do is pause this video and try and justify both positions, and then situate yourself somewhere in between or at either end. So on one end, the British Empire was a sign of Britain's military, cultural, and economic strength. We brought civilization, culture, and government to much of the world. On the other hand, the British Empire exploited the wealth of poorer nations, subjugated the native populations, and committed untold atrocities and miseries to millions of people. I should pause and say, if you don't know what the British Empire is, and if you don't know what these maps are, or the phrase, the sun never set on the British Empire, I'd like you to pause this video again and look that up, because if you don't know, then somewhat the ideas of Victorian British Empire are going to be lost on you. So you have to know what that is before you take an opinion about it. But I'd like you to pause now and take a position. Okay, so you have looked up the symbols of the British Empire. You've looked up what the British Empire is, and you've taken an opinion. Ideally, you'd be able to justify both positions, but I would also like you to have a personal response and how you feel about what empire means. So what we've begun to do is think about some of the big questions around Victoria, what was going on in Victoria's time, and we're going to look at how Tennyson engaged with them in a different way to someone like Stevenson, because what Stevenson was doing in his novel Jekyll and Hyde, and it's not just because he was Scottish, but he was addressing, to some extent, criticizing and exploring the hypocrisy of British culture and values, which was this celebration of rationality and civilization, while underneath is this kind of tension about violence and brutality. And I think one of the things that novel's doing is trying to look at that contradiction in British society. The Victorian poets that we look at on this course, Tennyson and Browning, do something very different. What they do in their poetry is they celebrate British values, and the Victorian era in particular. There's a picture of Queen Victoria. How might empire and culture have been defended as a just and fair idea is something that I'd like you to imaginatively enter. Whether you agree or not, I want you to think about how could someone defend those ideas? And if you want to learn more about different tensions and ideas, just one debate you could look at is between two prime ministers, Disraeli and Gladstone. That's one way you could think about this tension of empire, but there are lots of bigger ways of thinking about it. But right now I want you to think about really carefully, how could you possibly defend the notion of the British Empire? Okay, hopefully you've written something down. And if you want to learn more about this, you should definitely pause this video, go to Google, search around for a variety of opinions. I've given you some ideas for some things that you might want to know to help you understand the context of these poems. But at the end of the day, these are poems. So let's read them like they're poems. So the first poem we're going to look at by Tennyson is a poem called Ulysses. Now, Ulysses was the name that the Romans gave Odysseus. What kind of character was he? How might his heroism be celebrated? And what might be negative aspects of his personality? I'm going to change the lighting here. It's a bit bright. Okay, so if you don't know anything about Odysseus, these are three kind of visual cues. Odysseus was famous for coming up with the idea of the Trojan horse, which ended the Trojan War. But also the Trojan War lasted 10 years. It took him 10 years to get home. And one of the reasons it did was he mocked the Cyclops, and he told the Cyclops his name, and as a result, Poseidon had it out for Odysseus and prevented him from coming home. And by the time he came home, he was really angry, and there were all these men there trying to marry his wife, and he came home in disguise, and he killed all of them. He is both an amazing, heroic trickster character, but he also has some things about his character that are worth thinking about. How could this character represent the Victorian Empire? That's a strange thing, but I'm going to posit to you today that that's exactly what Tennyson's doing. So if you want to pause the video and try to stretch yourself, try to predict how does this story relate to the empire, and you should write something down. Okay, so what we're going to do, now this is my original lesson, it's going to be a bit tricky when you're away, but we're going to try it, is here's some things you got to know about Odysseus/Ulysses. He fought for 10 years in the Trojan War. He was the one that helped end it, but he took 10 years to come home. He's now in Ithaca, and he rules, but he's a bit bored. So the thing is, after all these adventures, 10 years of fighting, 10 years of journeying, gets home, he's a little bit bored. And there was a prophecy made that he wouldn't die at home, that he would die in another country. So these are the things you need to know about this character, Ulysses. So could you now pause and just generate at least 8 questions for Ulysses? What would you ask him? So you're going to pause and just try and come up. Remember, prediction and generation of ideas isn't just an idle activity. It's to engage you, to try and think about, anticipate what you're going to see in the poem. Okay, so now you have 8 questions that you'd ask this character. We're gonna imagine that we're interviewing him for Hello Magazine, and it's ready for the next step. And he's decided to leave Ithaca after all this time. He's come back to Penelope, and it's time to go journeying again. Okay, and we need to interview him. And we need to find out all the goss. We need to know all the goss. But the thing is, you work for the magazine. We only have questions. But we have the questions, but the answers are all in fragments. I'm only going to be able to give you fragmented answers. So what I'd like you to do when we do these exercises is to really look at the language and analyze what he's actually getting at. And I want you to, when we analyze, I want you to get under. We need the story of the real Ulysses. We want to figure out what's going on underneath. We're under time pressure, so the real manuscript's on the way, the real manuscript being the whole poem. And by the time we get it, we need to have some ideas because we got to work really quickly. So if you want, when we're doing this, you could practice asking your own questions. But here we go. We're going to try and figure out. So the first thing we have on the tape is, how do you find being at home with your beautiful wife, Penelope? There are rumors that you don't like ruling the people of Ithaca. Can you comment? Little profits that an idle king. Barren crags. Savage race, aged wife, that hoard and sleep and feed and know not me. Little idle king, little profits. He is a bored or idle king. He's not getting much joy from it. This island is more barren, empty, crags, kind of cliffs than anything beautiful. His wife is old, and the people he rules are savage. They're primitive. They're wild. and they don't even know him. So he seems kind of dissatisfied to me. What do you remember of your past life? What have you seen? I have enjoyed, suffered greatly, roaming with a hungry heart. Much have I seen and known, cities of men and manners, climates, councils, governments. I am part of all that I have met. So it seems that he's both had fun and suffered. He's had pain and joy from this. And he's roamed, he's explored, he's seen with hungry me. He wanted it. He craved it. And he's seen so much, different places, governments, countries, manners, and all of this that he's seen is part of who he is. And he seems to really have enjoyed that a lot. Third question. Oh, wait, so I should say, so what I'm wanting you to do is think about, and you always pause, is there a quote there that really captures what kind of character this person is? When you think about your past life of traveling and adventuring and compare it to today, how do you feel? Untraveled world whose margin fades. Dull it is to pause to make an end. Rust unburnished, not to shine in use. Gray spirit yearning in desire. So, what do we see? Untraveled world whose margin fades. What a beautiful line. So he by not seeing the world, these things at the margin seem to be going away. And he finds it boring to stop and to maybe finish. And he's like a sword that is rusting. The metal is rusting because it's not being drawn out or burnished, and it's not shining. And his spirit is fading, and he's yearning in desire. He's craving something. And so now we know that he's bored, he's craving something, he needs something. Your son grew up without you. Now you're planning on leaving again. Do you think he can handle it? When I am gone, he works his work, I mine. I think he's decided to go, and he's decided that his son will be fine. Who are the men you're taking on your journey? I'm not being rude, but you're about to die. Why bother going on a trip? Why not just die here? Soils that have toiled and wrought and thought. Thought with me? I'm sure it's fought with me, but okay. Death closes all, but something ere the end, some work of noble note may yet be done. Push off, and sitting well in order, smite the sounding furrows, for my purpose holds to sail beyond the sunset and the baths of all the western stars until I die. Look at these quotes. How is Ulysses answering these questions? What does his language reveal? I'm not going to do this one for you, but if you want to pause and just think about what are the words that stick out, what's language you don't know, what are things that you want to know more about? What is your goal? What's your ultimate purpose? I don't mean to upset you, and you don't have the strength you once had. What are you trying to prove? We are not now the strength which in old days moved earth and heaven. That which we are. To strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. That last line is quite famous, and it is really powerful. What is it? What is he? Can you look at the question and look at these fragmented answers and just look at what is this language revealing? What is he trying to prove? What language, what words show us what it is that he's trying to do? Okay, so now we have the whole transcript, but the audio track isn't working. So what you've got to do is read out the whole of his words. And what you can do if we were together is to pause and rewind and ask the questions while the other one reads the whole transcript. But we can't do that exercise. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to practice you reading the whole poem with me. And what I really recommend you do, I'm going to change the light so we can get the pure light there. What I really want you to practice doing is reading this poem out loud, because it is so fantastic to read out loud, and you really get the sense of what it is that Tennyson's trying to do here. Let me now bring this to you. So remember what we do when we read a poem. We read it once, we read it twice, and we read it the third time. And now I've given you some fragments, some questions. What you can do is write the interview questions throughout the poem and just read and reread what you think is going on in this poem. It is a dramatic monologue. We hear the voice of Ulysses. We don't hear the interviewer. This is the whole transcript. And again, I'd like to invite you to really practice reading the poem and read it along with me if it helps. It little profits that an idle king by this still hearth among the barren crags, matched with an aged wife, I mete and dole unequal laws unto a savage race, that hoard and sleep and feed and know not me. Oh, wow. These savage people, they don't know who I am. They don't know me. He feels alone. And in a misogynistic way, his old wife is not doing it for him anymore, it seems. I cannot rest from travel. I will drink life to the lees. All times I've enjoyed greatly, have suffered greatly, both with those that loved me and alone on shore, when through scudding drifts the rainy Hyades vexed the dim sea. I'm become a name, for always roaming with a hungry heart, much have I seen and known, cities of men and manners, climates, councils, governments, myself not least, but honored of them all, and drunk delight of battle with my peers, far on the ringing plains of windy Troy. I am part of all that I have met, yet all experience is an arch wherethrough gleams that untraveled world, whose margin fades forever and forever when I move. So here are all his good times. But all of this is fading now because he's not doing anything. How dull it is to pause to make an end, to rust unburnished, not to shine in use, as though to breathe were life. Life piled on life were all too little, and of one to me little remains. But every hour is saved from that eternal silence, something more, a bringer of new things. What is this bringer of new things? What does he want? And violet were for some 3 suns to store and hoard myself, and this grey spirit yearning in desire to follow knowledge like a sinking star beyond the utmost bound of human thought. So he's wanting to do he wants something. He wants knowledge. He wants to be useful. He doesn't want to sit idle with these people he doesn't care about. So let's just put a line here. Stanza breaks are often good places to show that there's a shift or a volta here. Let's continue. This is my son, mine own Telemachus, to whom I leave the scepter and the isle, well loved of me, discerning to fulfill this labor, by slow prudence to make mild a rugged people, and through soft decrees subdue them to the useful and the good. So again, he doesn't like the people he rules. His son is going to be able to subdue them and make them good. My son will rule without me. He's fine. Most blameless is he, centered in the sphere of common duties, dissent not to fail in offices of tenderness, and pay meet adoration to my household gods when I'm gone. He works his work, I mine. There's a break with his son. Now the triumphant ending of this poem, where he justifies what he's going to do. There lies the port, the vessel puffs her sail. What a great image. That image of the wind. It's anticipation. It's ready to go. There gloom the dark broad seas. My mariners, souls that have toiled and wrought and thought with me, thought. Maybe I don't know if I've copied this poem wrong. That ever with a frolic welcome look the thunder and the sunshine, and opposed free hearts, free foreheads. You and I are old. Old age hath yet his honor and his toil. Death closes all. But something ere the end, some work of noble note, may yet be done, not unbecoming men that strove with gods. You see the build-up. There is work to be done. He is not done. The lights begin to twinkle from the rocks. The long day wanes, the slow moon climbs, the deep moans round with many voices. There it is, there it is, there it is, there it is. Here's the last charge. Come, my friends, it's not too late to seek a newer world. Push off, and sitting well in order smite, the sounding furrows for my purpose holds, to sail beyond the sunset, and the baths of all the western stars until I die. It may be that the gulfs will wash us down. It may be we shall touch the happy isles, and see the great Achilles whom we knew. Though much is taken, much abides, and though we are not now that strength which in old days moved earth and heaven, that which we are, one equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. I couldn't even annotate because these final lines are triumphant. I'm old, but it doesn't matter. That which we are. Acceptance. Acceptance, yes, but never give up. That's what this poem is about. Never giving up, continuing to go, to continue to fight, to look, to find, just never stopping. To never be made weak, to always take the next step, to not be rested and over things. That's what this poem's about. And again, I really invite you to read the poem out loud, to find the rhythm of it, particularly the final part. And poems, what you have to know about poems is, if you learn to read them out loud and get the rhythm of it and the breath of it and the language, you don't need to understand the words, and you can still get the spirit, because poems are sonic experiences. Ulysses definitely is. The ending, that triumphant call, get the sound of it. Now, if you want to understand the meaning, what you could do is rewind this video and go back to the interview questions. I'll be sending the PowerPoint as well, of course, on Google Classroom, so you'll be able to use that. And to really carefully unpack what's being said in the different sections. And what I've tried to do just in reading it now is give you those different sections. They may not be exactly what I did on the lesson itself, but when I'm reading, I notice those breaks. Stanza breaks are clear moments of break, but there's sometimes little shifts in meaning that you can find elsewhere. So, moving on. Could you now pause and go back and reread Ulysses 2 or 3 times and annotate it? And could you take out the quotations and evidence that you think is most important? Again, if you want to cheat, you can look at those parts of my lesson that already identify those key quotes. And now I'd like you to set a timer for yourself for 5 minutes and respond using that evidence. How does Tennyson use Ulysses' story to celebrate the courage and exploration? And this is a bit trickier and will require you to stretch your mind and maybe use some of the things you've learned about empire. Is there any way that you could link Victorian ideas of empire, this idea of exploration, of continuing, of conquering, of knowledge, of not resting? Is there any way that you can link any of those lines to ideas of empire? So I'd like you to pause now and start by just picking key evidence, writing it down in your book, and then setting a timer for 5 minutes and reflecting. How does this poem make you think about those things? And if you can't, I just want you to think about what this poem makes you think and feel. I feel, I think, I wonder. Okay, if you pause now and do that. Okay, so you've read Ulysses, you've taken 5 minutes you've annotated it, Now you've thought about the language, the imagery, you've reminded yourself of how to read a poem, and now we're going to go into reading the next poem, The Charge of the Light Brigade, which is the poem you need to know for the scene poems. But we're going to approach it again as if you've never seen it. I'm going to give you some context to help you out, okay? So, The Charge of the Light Brigade. So, it's 1834, and England is at war with Russia in the Crimea. And Tennyson is in London, and he reads a newspaper report about the disastrous attack. And light brigade, as opposed to heavy, were men on horses without much armor. That's why they're light. And there was a miscommunication of orders, and the light brigade attacked a position heavily armed with guns on all sides. And it was basically a suicide mission. And they charged as ordered, and it was a bloodbath. 400 of the 500 men were dead when they returned from their charge. It was brutal. So this is just a drawing of it. You can look this up on Wikipedia as well. There's a painting of it, and then there's a drawing kind of diagramming. So here we see they start, and there are guns, rifles posted, shooting at both sides and there. And then when they got to the end of this dead end, they had to turn around and go through it again. So you see, it was like the metaphor or the simile I'd use, like shooting fish in a barrel. They were virtually undefended. So this was a horrible, horrible situation. I'd like you to predict, in what ways might this attack have been considered a blunder or an act of bravery? So it was a mistake, for sure, but it was also brave. Why? Can you predict how people might have responded to this attack? Okay, now it's important that you're able to see it both ways and not just one, because when we look at Tennyson's version, I really want you to think about, okay, well, he's going to argue that it's an act of bravery, but there are people who see it differently. So he is trying to memorialize and celebrate the courage of these men. So what I'd like you to do is read the poem on your own and annotate, ask some questions. The things I'd like you to notice in this poem are the repetition and the variation, and some of the key lines. Again, what you're practicing doing is reading a poem, and for yourself, approaching it, trusting yourself, being able to annotate, underline, question, put stars, underline, words that occur to you while you're reading. If you're someone who's worried about getting it right or wrong, you can do that in pencil. And then when I'm annotating, you could do it with me. I'm going to give a live reading of it. You can find, and I will put a link in YouTube where you can do another live reading with me that I did years ago, which tried to get more of the detail of the poem. But what we're trying to do is just get you to trust yourself to be able to realize that you can read a poem and get your own meaning. Poem's not a secret. There's not some secret. You just got to learn the techniques of reading to understand and enjoy what's being said. So let's take a look at this poem. It's on page 27 of your booklets. It's The Charge of the Light Brigade. Let's take a look at this. You see it's so different than Ulysses. We don't get the long line. We get these very short, attenuated lines. You're going to see rhyme is really important. I'm going to bring this in closer because we're going to read one stanza at a time. So let me read it once. Half a league, half a league, half a league onward. All in the valley of death rode the 600. Forward the light brigade, charge for the guns, he said. Into the valley of death rode the 600. Forward the light brigade. Was there a man dismayed? Not though the soldier knew. Someone had blundered. Theirs not to make reply, theirs not to reason why, theirs but to do and die. Into the valley of death rode the 600. Cannon to the right of them, cannon to the left of them, cannon in front of them, volleyed and thunder, stormed at with shot and shell. Boldly they rode and well into the jaws of death, into the mouth of hell rode the 600. Flashed all their sabres bare, flashed as they turned in air, sabering the gunners there, charging an army, while all the world wondered, plunged in the battery smoke. Right through the line they broke. Cossack and Russian reeled from the saber stroke, shattered and sundered. Then they rode back, but not the 600. Oof, that I'm sorry, I'm just going to mark that right away because that that repetition I never noticed, and that's really quite powerful. Cannon to the right of them, cannon to the left of them, cannon behind them, volleyed and thunder, stormed at with shot and shell, while horse and hero fell. They that had fought so well came through the jaws of death, back from the mouth of hell, all that was left of them, left of 600. When can their glory fade? Oh, the wild charge they made, all the world wondered. Honor the charge they made, honor the light brigade, noble 600. These, for me, the imperative, look, you better do this, because we're not going to let them fade. That isn't something we're going to allow to happen at all. And that's what this poem's about. It's a memorialization. So let's read this again and try and see what's going on. This is a religious reference. The Valley of Death, this metaphor, where they're going is a place of death. Was there a man dismayed? Look, none of them knew, but there had been a blunder, a mistake. Blunder is a really powerful word there, but it's a bit light because so many men had died. But this triple line and this repetition is, for me, one of the key parts of the poem, and a really famous. They didn't talk back. They didn't question. They died. No question. Just duty and death. And this deserves honor for Tennyson. This image, through the repetition, is they're surrounded. So I showed you that image, but you could get it from right there. They're surrounded. And you'll see that this surrounded, then they have to do it again on the way back. They're surrounded completely. And they go into the jaws of death and the mouth of hell. Okay, so the metaphor now is a place, a kind of monstrous image of going into a beast's mouth, and that is a place of hell and death. So they get to the end, and what they're able to do is these Russians, they reel from these strokes because our men are such good soldiers. They're such good soldiers that they freak out all these Russians and Cossacks, and they just destroy them, okay? And they broke through their ranks, and they charge them, and the men kind of stumble back. These Russians and Cossacks reel from the saber strokes of our good British Light Brigade, and then they have to turn around. But that not this repetition is pretty interesting to me. I never noticed it, but it really emphasizes the fact that not all the men came back. That repetition. So they come back through, and they get stormed at again, and they fought so well, of course, but they come out. They come through the jaws and mouth. That metaphor is again picked up. So it's as if they've gone to hell and back. And it's not all of them. All that was left of them. All that was left of them. Left of the 600. Oh gosh, I got the numbers wrong. Sorry, 4 of 500 or 4 of 600 must be. Please correct that. And this sixth stanza, I think, is really important because it's rhetorical. This wild charge, is it going to fade from people's memory? Because all the world wondered, and he reminds the reader to honor what they've done and honor their nobility. And in a way, that's what, very clearly, to me anyway, that's what the poem's about. Making sure that you honor what they've done. But it begs the question, why wouldn't people do that anyway? For me, might it have something to do with this word blunder? that it was a mistake. So how can you make a mistake? How can a mistake be honorable? And part of the answer to that is obedience and duty. And I think that's part of what Tennyson's really celebrating in this poem. And it's worth you thinking about what those things mean. Now, what I'd like you to do with Tennyson's poem is I'd like you to think about your own ideas of the poem. And we don't have a discussion, unfortunately. If you're there with someone or can discuss with someone, your thinking and writing will always go further. You must try and find some evidence from the poem, some of the imagery, some of the repetition, some of the key moments, and try and respond to it. Here are some examples of what a journal should have. And I'd like you to press pause, and I'd like you to take 5 minutes, and I'd like you to take your own response in writing to the poem. Okay, so we've read 2 of Tennyson's poems. You've thought about what they mean to you. You've practiced language analysis in interviewing the character of Ulysses. You've had a personal response to Tennyson's poem, Charge of the Light Brigade. Now, what I'd like you to do as your final task for Charge of the Light Brigade, as a creative writing task, is I'd like you to turn, so if Tennyson was inspired by a newspaper article and he responded, I want you to turn this poem back into a newspaper article. You know, here's an exercise I never thought about, but you might actually go on the internet and find out the original article that Tennyson was responding to. That might help you. I've given you a headline here, Heroic Charge Ends in Tragedy. A subheadline, Light Brigade Gallops into Maw of Death. Maw is a word for mouth. Could you turn this poem back into a newspaper article? You can do 2 paragraphs or 3 as you see fit. You could do 6. All 6 would be an easy structure following the poem. What I'd like you to do is make sure you have the detail of the facts. I'd like you to use the language of the poem. And there is an aspect of opinion where I'd want you to persuade people to feel sympathy. If you're able, could you express a counter opinion, which is, no, this was a mistake and people should be punished. Okay, so I'd like you to pause, and I'd like you to do that exercise now. Okay, so what we've done today is you've read 2 poems of Tennyson's, you've looked at the imagery and thought about what they mean, you've looked at the language, you've thought about Victorian attitudes to empire, and thought about how context helps you read the poem, but you've treated the poems as poems fundamentally to try and figure out the voice that's speaking, the meaning, and the what of the poem, before you think about the how of the poem. So you think about what's going on, you read the poem, try to annotate, try to ask questions, try to answer questions, try to annotate, try to make it make sense for you. If you need more help, of course, you'll go to my YouTube channel and watch my video. I'll put a link of this to it at the end. And if you want to stretch, what I want you to think about is what styles and techniques would you expect from a Tennyson poem? And if you really want to learn more about poetry, you should read more poetry. And if you really want to learn more about Tennyson, you should read more of his poetry, not just read more of his biography. I invite you to read more of his poems to understand what kind of poet he was. Because the more you read, the more you'll understand his language, his technique, and how he responds and expresses himself. And what you can do if you want to stretch more is to look at how the previous poets, Blake, Shelley, and Wordsworth, are poets that are sometimes, often under the umbrella of Romanticism. And Tennyson is, as I've said, is a Victorian poet, and he's very different than what those Romantic poets did. And might you want to stretch and look at what is that distinction as well? We will be doing more of that in the context part. So, this is what we've done today, and the plenary, I'd like you to just think about this. These famous lines, theirs not to make reply, theirs not to reason why, theirs but to do and die. How did these lines, for you, reflect British Victorian values? But I want you to think about 2020, and I want you to think about how might we read these lines differently today? And, when I did this lesson, and I've been teaching this poem for years, I'm thinking about mostly the First World War and how they reinterpret these lines. But now that we're under lockdown with the coronavirus, now, yet again, these lines mean something different to me. What does it mean to not reply, to not reason why, but to do and die? I mean, what? That last line is just haunting me, it's hitting me differently. What do these lines mean to us today? Something I want you to think about. Okay, so I'm going to put some links to my video annotating this. I'm going to put the lesson on the Google Classroom. Keep learning, keep doing what you need to do, keep reading, keep annotating, do the written exercises. You're going to learn plenty to get you ready for when we come back to school.